For 3 years, Laura Garcia's modest ranch-style home in the tranquil, sun-drenched enclave of Lakewood, California, stood not as a haven of warmth and familial love, but as a hollowed-out monument to a loss so vast it seemed to consume the very essence of her being. The house, with its neatly trimmed lawn and faded pastel walls, was no longer a home but a shrine, a fragile fortress built to preserve the memory of her son, Captain Alexander Garcia, whose absence left an ache that permeated every corner of her existence. The creaking hardwood floors, the soft hum of the air conditioning, the carefully arranged furniture, all of it bore the weight of his absence, as if the house itself mourned him. Each room was a gallery of his life, adorned with framed photographs that captured moments frozen in time. Alexander at 10, his face smudged with dirt and his grin wide in a dusty baseball uniform, his eyes sparkling with the boundless joy of youth. Alexander at West Point, a proud cadet with a ramrod-straight posture, his gaze burning with ambition and purpose. Alexander in his crisp dress blues, a decorated officer whose steady eyes radiated a quiet, unshakable promise, a promise of a future that had been brutally, irrevocably stolen. On the polished oak mantelpiece, his medals gleamed under the soft glow of a nearby lamp, sacred relics of a life of valor. The Purple Heart, earned in the choking dust and chaos of Kandahar, where he had shielded his men from an ambush. The Bronze Star for valor, a testament to a courage that had faced down enemy fire but proved powerless against the silent, insidious treachery that had erased him from the world. Each medal was a tangible piece of his legacy, meticulously polished by Laura's trembling hands, as if their shine could keep his memory alive, a flickering light against the darkness of her grief. The air in the house felt heavy, saturated with the lingering presence of Alexander, a specter who refused to fade. Laura moved through her days with a mechanical precision, as if maintaining the house in pristine order could summon him back, his combat boots heavy on the hardwood, his deep, resonant laugh filling the emptiness that had settled into every corner. She dusted his medals daily, their metallic surfaces catching the light like stars in a night sky she could no longer see. She polished the frames of his photographs, her fingers lingering on the glass, as if she could touch the boy, the cadet, the soldier he had been. His bedroom remained a time capsule, untouched, a museum of a life interrupted. His bed made with military precision, the corners of the sheets tucked with the discipline he had carried into every aspect of his life. His books neatly stacked on a shelf, their spines worn from late-night study sessions. His old baseball glove resting on a shelf like a relic of a simpler time, its leather softened by years of use. The world outside her home moved on, its colors muted, its sounds distant, but Laura remained anchored to her loss, her heart tethered to a fragile, flickering hope that somewhere, somehow, her son was still out there, waiting to be found. Alexander had vanished on a warm, golden weekend in August 2015, a day that began with the mundane rhythm of everyday life. Birds chirping in the eucalyptus trees, neighbors mowing their lawns, the hum of summer in the air, and ended in a void so profound it defied all comprehension. One moment, he was the charismatic, deeply respected leader of his company at Camp Pendleton, a man whose tactical brilliance was matched only by his unyielding integrity. He was a soldier who inspired his men, not through fear or bluster, but through the quiet, unshakable strength of his character. A leader who commanded loyalty with his steady presence, his ability to remain calm under pressure, his knack for knowing when to listen and when to act. The next moment, he was gone, dissolved into the ether as if the universe had simply erased him. His Ford Mustang, a sleek black relic of his pride and joy, was found abandoned in a desolate parking lot at the edge of the sprawling Angeles National Forest, its chrome gleaming under the unrelenting California sun. Inside, his wallet and phone lay neatly arranged on the passenger seat, untouched, unmarred by any sign of violence or struggle. There was no note, no witnesses, no trace of a fight. Just an absence so pristine, so absolute, It seemed as though the chaparral-scented air of the forest had swallowed him whole, leaving nothing behind but questions that gnawed at Laura's soul. The United States Army, an institution built on the pillars of order, discipline, and certainty, abhorred such a vacuum of explanation. With cold, bureaucratic efficiency, they classified Alexander as AWOL, absent without leave, a designation that struck Laura like a physical blow, a desecration of her son's legacy of honor and sacrifice. She had stood in the sterile, fluorescent-lit office of a base administrator, her hands trembling as she clutched a photograph of Alexander in his pristine uniform, his chest adorned with the symbols of his service. Her voice cracked as she pleaded with them to understand that her son, a man who had survived 2 grueling tours in a war zone, who had stared death in the face and emerged unbroken, would never abandon his post, his men, or his duty. The word deserter hung in the air like a curse, a venomous accusation that carved itself into her heart, leaving a wound that bled anew with every memory of his pride, his discipline, his love for his country. She remembered the way he had stood at attention during his commissioning ceremony, his eyes bright with purpose, and the way he had hugged her afterward, promising to make her proud. To hear that legacy reduced to a bureaucratic label was a betrayal she could not forgive. A year later, after months of fruitless searches, dead-end leads, and an agonizing silence that stretched like a desert, the Army shifted his classification to presumed deceased. A flag was folded with crisp, ceremonial precision. Condolences were delivered with practiced solemnity, and the official file was closed, sealed away in some bureaucratic vault, as if Alexander's life could be reduced to a checkbox on a form. But for Laura, a woman whose life had been shaped by the unwavering discipline and fierce loyalty of a career military spouse, presumed was not an answer. It was a purgatory, a liminal space she refused to inhabit. Her son, a man of profound duty, a man who had faced death and walked away, did not simply misplace his life. He was out there, somewhere, or someone had taken him from her, and she would not rest until she knew the truth. In the long, echoing silence of those 3 years, Laura's grief became a living thing, a shadow that clung to her every step, a weight that pressed against her chest with every breath. She rose each morning with the same ritual, brewing coffee in a kitchen that felt too large without Alexander's laughter, tending to the small garden he had helped her plant as a boy, and sitting in his room, surrounded by the artifacts of his life. She would trace the edges of his medals, remembering the letters he had sent from Afghanistan, his words filled with a quiet pride in his men, a determination to do right by them. She would sit on his bed, smoothing the blanket, imagining him walking through the door, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his smile banishing the darkness. The world outside her home moved on. Children played in the streets, neighbors waved as they passed. The seasons changed with relentless indifference. But Laura remained suspended in time, her life defined by the absence that consumed it. Her friends, well-meaning but unable to bridge the chasm of her grief, stopped calling as often, their voices tinged with pity she couldn't bear. She didn't want their sympathy. She wanted answers, a reason for the void that had swallowed her son. Her only solace in those desolate, endless years came from Annie. Sweet, gentle Annie, with her wide, soulful eyes and a quiet fragility that seemed to draw people into her orbit, as if her vulnerability were a beacon calling out for protection. Annie had been the great love of Alexander's life, the woman he had planned to marry, the woman Laura had already embraced as a daughter long before the ring had been placed on her finger. They had met at a military charity event, where Annie's quiet grace had caught Alexander's eye, her soft-spoken kindness a counterpoint to his disciplined intensity. Laura remembered the way Alexander's face had lit up when he spoke of her, the way his voice softened, the way he had said, "Mom, she's the one." In the raw, chaotic aftermath of Alexander's disappearance, Annie had been a mirror of Laura's devastation, her grief as palpable and profound as Laura's own. They had clung to each other like survivors of a shipwreck, their shared loss forging a bond that felt unbreakable, a lifeline in a sea of despair. They held candlelit vigils in the backyard, the flickering flames casting long shadows that seemed to dance with Alexander's memory, their light reflecting in the tears that streaked their faces. Over endless cups of coffee, brewed in the quiet of Laura's kitchen, they shared stories of him, his dry, sarcastic humor that could lighten even the darkest moments, his quiet acts of kindness that he never boasted about, like the time he had stayed up all night helping a struggling recruit prepare for a fitness test, or the way he had surprised Annie with a picnic under the stars. His thoughtfulness as precise as his military maneuvers. Annie's tears were a perfect reflection of Laura's own, and in their shared sorrow, Laura found a fragile but necessary comfort. The woman her son had chosen was worthy of him, a vessel of love as deep and true as his own, a partner in keeping his memory alive in a world that seemed determined to forget him. They would sit together on Laura's porch, watching the sun set over Lakewood, the sky ablaze with hues of orange and pink, and talk about the future Alexander had envisioned. A home filled with children, a life built on love and trust. Annie would clutch a photograph of him, her fingers tracing his face, her voice breaking as she spoke of the wedding they had planned, the dress she had chosen, the vows she had written in her heart. Laura would hold her hand, their grief a shared language, a bond that felt sacred in its intensity. Annie became a fixture in Laura's life, a daughter-in-law in all but name, a constant presence who understood the depth of her loss. Together, they navigated the bureaucracy of the Army's investigation, attending meetings with base officials, pleading for more resources, more attention, more answers. They visited the parking lot where Alexander's Mustang had been found, standing in silence as the wind whispered through the chaparral, as if it might carry his voice back to them. Annie's presence was a balm, a reminder that Laura was not alone in her pain, that someone else loved Alexander as fiercely as she did. But the truth, when it finally emerged, was not a balm. It was a blade, sharp and merciless, that carved through the delicate fabric of Laura's world, shredding the illusion she had clung to for survival. In the blistering heat of October 2018, a team of construction workers, grading a remote hillside for a new pipeline in the Angeles National Forest, unearthed a human skeleton from a shallow, unmarked grave. The body had been wrapped in industrial plastic, buried with a care that spoke not of reverence, but of cold, calculated efficiency, as if the act were a transaction to be completed and forgotten. The discovery sent a shockwave through the small community of Lakewood, where Alexander's disappearance had become a quiet legend, a story whispered in coffee shops and churches. Dental records confirmed the unthinkable. Captain Alexander Garcia had come home, not as a living son, not as the vibrant man who had filled Laura's life with pride, but as a silent, skeletal accusation, a grim testament to a crime that had been hidden in the earth for 3 long years. The autopsy report landed on the desk of LAPD homicide detective Miles Corbin like a grenade, its contents explosive and irrevocable, shattering the fragile hope that had sustained Laura. It detailed a single gunshot wound to the back of the head, a chillingly personal and final act, delivered with the precision of an executioner. The bullet had entered at an angle that suggested Alexander had been kneeling, his body defenseless, his spirit defiant even in his final moments. But it was the toxicology report that ripped the case from the realm of the ordinary into something far darker, far more sinister. Alexander's bones were saturated with ketamine, a powerful veterinary tranquilizer, its chemical signature lingering like a ghost in his remains, a marker of a crime that was not born of impulse but of meticulous planning. This was no random act of violence, no tragic twist of fate. Alexander Garcia had been incapacitated, neutralized with clinical precision, and then murdered in cold blood. This was a planned assassination, a betrayal so calculated, so deliberate. It seemed to mock the very honor that had defined his life, spitting on the legacy of a man who had lived for duty and sacrifice. The news transformed Laura. The soft, sorrowful edges of her grief hardened into something sharp and unyielding, a blade forged in the crucible of her loss, tempered by a mother's fierce, unrelenting love. The years of passive waiting, of clinging to hope in the face of silence, were over. She had a mission now, a purpose that burned with a ferocity that consumed her every thought, to find a monster who had turned her son into a ghost, to bring them to justice, to make them pay for the life they had stolen. She became a quiet, relentless presence at the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, a civilian consultant on the murder of her own child, her resolve a force that commanded respect even from hardened detectives. She sat in cramped, fluorescent-lit rooms, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her voice steady as she poured out a lifetime of information about her son. She spoke of his childhood, his love for baseball, his determination to serve his country. She recounted his letters from Afghanistan, his pride in his men, his dreams of a life with Annie. She painted a portrait of a man so fundamentally decent, so steadfast in his principles, that his murder seemed not just a crime, but a violation of the natural order, an affront to the universe itself. Alexander had been a soldier's soldier, admired by his men, respected by his superiors, a man who lived by a code of honor that left no room for enemies. He had no gambling debts, no secret addictions, no shadowy connections that could explain such a brutal end. His life was an open book, its pages filled with duty, courage, and an unwavering love for those he held dear. While Detective Corbin and his team chased the physical evidence, tracing the specific chemical signature of the black market ketamine through a labyrinth of veterinary suppliers, underground labs, and street-level drug dealers, Laura began her own, more intimate investigation. She wasn't searching for a motive. She was searching for a context, a single detail in her son's meticulously ordered life that she had overlooked, a crack in the foundation that might explain the inexplicable. She spent weeks in his preserved bedroom, a space frozen in time, sorting through letters, photo albums, and old college yearbooks with the care of an archaeologist unearthing a lost civilization. She ran her fingers over the faded ink of his handwriting, inhaled the faint, lingering scent of his cologne and the clothes he had left behind, and felt the weight of his absence like a physical presence pressing against her. Each item was a piece of him, a fragment of the life she had lost, and she examined them with a reverence that bordered on obsession, desperate for a clue that would make sense of the senseless. She read his old emails, his notes from West Point, his journal entries from his deployments, searching for a hint of discord, a shadow of betrayal, anything that might point to why he had been taken from her. One sweltering afternoon, as the California sun beat down on the house, turning the air thick and oppressive, she found it, tucked into the back of a worn leather photo album. Hidden behind a picture of Alexander and his platoon, their faces beaming with camaraderie after a successful mission, was a photograph she had never seen before. It was of Annie, but not the Annie she knew, not the soft, grieving woman with the soulful eyes who had shared her tears and her vigils. This Annie had jet black hair, a defiant sneer curling her lips, and eyes that held a hardness Laura had never witnessed, a glint of defiance and danger that sent a chill down her spine. She stood with her arm looped through that of a young man with slicked-back hair and a dead-eyed gaze that radiated menace, a coldness that seemed to seep through the photograph itself. He was handsome in a cheap, dangerous way, his hand resting on Annie's waist with a possessive authority that spoke of control, not affection. The photograph was a window into a past Annie had never mentioned, a life that predated Alexander, a life that felt like a betrayal in its secrecy, a dark secret buried beneath the facade of the woman Laura had trusted. The back of the photo bore a faded inscription in Annie's handwriting, "Me and G, Summer, '09. The simplicity of the words belied the weight they carried. A single letter, G, opening a Pandora's box of questions Laura wasn't sure she wanted to answer. Laura's heart pounded as she stared at the image, her mind racing with questions she didn't want to ask but could no longer avoid. Who was this man? Why had Annie hidden this part of her life? What did it mean for Alexander, for his death, for the truth Laura had been chasing? She invited Annie over that evening, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her, a tempest of doubt and fear that threatened to overwhelm her. When she placed the photograph on the kitchen table, its edges worn, but its image starkly clear. Annie's reaction was a masterclass in composure, a performance polished to perfection. A light, airy laugh spilled from her lips, as if the image were a harmless relic of a forgotten youth, a trivial artifact. "Oh, God, that thing," she said, waving a dismissive hand, her voice bright but brittle, like glass on the verge of shattering. "That was my wild child phase in my early 20s. His name was Gabriel. He was a mistake, Laura. A stupid, regrettable mistake from a lifetime ago. The words were perfect, the delivery seamless, a script rehearsed to deflect suspicion. But Laura, a mother whose senses had been honed by grief into something almost supernatural, saw it. A flicker of pure, cold panic in Annie's eyes, a crack in the facade that vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a moment so fleeting it might have been imagined, but Laura knew better. She had spent 3 years studying every nuance of Annie's face, every tear, every sigh, and this was different. This was fear, raw and unguarded, a glimpse into a truth Annie had worked hard to bury. The moment haunted Laura, burrowing into her mind like a splinter she couldn't ignore. She couldn't shake the image of that panic, the way it had betrayed something deeper, something hidden beneath Annie's carefully crafted grief. She hired a private investigator the next day, a grizzled former cop named Frank Delgado, whose weathered face and steady demeanor promised results, a man who had seen the worst of humanity and still chased the truth. She handed him the photograph and the name Gabriel, her voice trembling but resolute, and asked him to excavate the past that Annie had so carefully buried. She didn't tell Annie what she had done. She couldn't bear to confront the woman who had become her confidant, her partner in grief, until she had answers, until she knew whether the woman her son had loved was a victim or a viper. The decision weighed on her, a betrayal of the bond they had forged, but Laura's love for her son was a fiercer force, a fire that burned through her doubts and fears. At the same time, Detective Corbin's team made a breakthrough that sent a jolt through the investigation. An informant, a jittery low-level dealer squeezed for information on the black market ketamine trade, gave him a name. Gabriel Alonso, a ruthless, mid-level trafficker who controlled a slice of the drug trade in the San Fernando Valley. Alonso had a history of using tranquilizers to subdue victims during robberies, a signature that matched the chilling precision of Alexander's murder. The use of ketamine a hallmark of his methodical cruelty. The name was logged, a single piece in a puzzle that still lacked a clear picture, but it sent a surge of adrenaline through Corbin's team. They began to dig deeper, pulling records, tracking connections, building a case brick by brick, each piece bringing them closer to the truth. They traced the ketamine to a specific batch, stolen from a veterinary clinic in Van Nuys, and followed the trail to a network of dealers who operated in the shadows of Los Angeles' sprawling underworld. The investigation was methodical, relentless, a slow burn toward justice that mirrored Laura's own determination. The PI's report arrived a week later, and it was the key that unlocked the truth, a Pandora's box of revelations that Laura had both sought and dreaded. Gabriel Alonso wasn't just a random figure from Annie's past. He was a significant part of it, a shadow that had loomed over her life long before Alexander entered it, a dark thread woven into the fabric of her history. The report detailed a 2009 domestic disturbance call in a rundown apartment complex in North Hollywood, where a young woman named Annie Reyes, her maiden name, had been treated for minor injuries after a violent altercation with her boyfriend, Gabriel Alonso. The report painted a picture of a volatile, toxic relationship, one marked by control, fear, and bursts of violence. A relationship Annie had escaped but never fully left behind. There were other details: arrests for petty crimes, a restraining order that had lapsed, a history of violence that followed Alonso like a dark cloud, tainting everything he touched. The report included grainy surveillance photos of Alonso from recent years, his face older but no less menacing, his eyes still carrying that dead-eyed stare that had chilled Laura in the photograph. There were also records of Annie's life after she left him. Her move to Lakewood, her reinvention as a soft-spoken, respectable woman, her careful erasure of her past. But the past, the report suggested, had never truly let her go. Laura read the report in the dim light of her living room, her hands shaking, her heart a battleground of betrayal and dread, the pieces of the puzzle snapping together with a sickening clarity. She drove the file to the sheriff's department the next morning, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions, anger, fear, and a deep, aching sadness. When Detective Corbin placed the PI's report next to the informant's intelligence, the two disparate threads of the investigation fused together with seismic force, shaking the foundation of everything Laura had believed. Gabriel Alonso was no longer a peripheral figure. He was now directly linked to the heart of Alexander Garcia's life, a malignant presence that had infiltrated the love and trust Alexander had built. The focus of the investigation shifted, its weight settling squarely on Annie, the woman who had shared Laura's grief, who had held her hand through the darkest nights, who had sworn to love Alexander forever. Warrants were issued for her phone and financial records, and what they revealed was a hidden history that shattered Laura's world anew. A series of untraceable cash withdrawals in the summer of 2015, totaling thousands of dollars, siphoned from accounts Laura had never known existed. Call logs from a burner phone showing dozens of communications with Gabriel Alonso in the month before Alexander disappeared. Each call a breadcrumb leading to a betrayal Laura could scarcely comprehend. The evidence was a map of deception, each data point a step closer to a truth that Laura had both sought and feared, a truth that threatened to destroy her. They brought Annie in for questioning, and she walked into the interrogation room wrapped in an aura of bewildered innocence, her wide eyes glistening with what seemed like genuine fear, her hands clasped tightly as if to steady herself against the storm she must have known was coming. For 6 hours, she held fast, her portrayal of a grieving, terrified woman a masterwork of emotional theater, a performance honed by years of deception. She wept for Alexander, her voice breaking as she spoke of his kindness, his strength, the future they had planned together, a wedding, a home, a life filled with love. She painted Gabriel as a monster who had stalked her, a ghost from her past she couldn't shake, a predator who had re-entered her life with threats and demands she had no choice but to obey. She admitted to paying him off, to buying his silence about a past she was ashamed of, a past she was terrified would disappoint the perfect man she had finally found, the man who had given her a new life. Her performance was flawless, her tears a perfect mirror of the grief she had shared with Laura for 3 long years, a grief that had bound them together. The detectives listened, their faces impassive, their notebooks filling with her carefully crafted words. Then, Detective Corbin played his trump card, his voice flat and devoid of sympathy, cutting through the haze of her performance. "Gabriel's talking, Annie," he said, leaning forward, his eyes locked on hers. "He's telling us you were in on it. He's saying you helped him plan it, that you were jealous of your boyfriend's success, that you wanted him out of the way. He's making a deal. He's going to walk away, and you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison for capital murder." It was a calculated lie, a gambit designed to break her, and it found a fracture point in her carefully constructed composure. The mask of the grieving victim shattered, and the creature underneath was revealed, a woman consumed by fear, guilt, and a venomous self-pity that poured out in a torrent of words, her voice raw with desperation. Yes, Gabriel had found her, she admitted, her words spilling out like a dam breaking. He had blackmailed her, threatening to send Alexander photos and police reports of her past life. Not just a life of reckless youth, but one of complicity in Gabriel's criminal world, a world of petty theft, drug deals, and moral compromise she had once embraced as her own. To protect her new, pristine identity, the life she had built with Alexander, the life she had convinced herself she deserved, she had submitted. The blackmail had started with money, small payments to keep Gabriel at bay, but it had escalated into a forced, adulterous affair, a grotesque parody of her old life bleeding into her new one, tainting the love she had sworn to cherish. Alex found out. She wailed, her tears now hot with self-preservation, her hands clutching the edge of the table as if it could anchor her. He walked in on us. He was going to leave me. Gabriel went insane. He said he was going to talk to Alex, to fix it, to end the threat once and for all. She swore on her love for Alexander, on the life they had planned together, that she never knew Gabriel meant to kill him. She had just been too scared, too broken, too trapped to do anything to stop it. It was Gabriel, in a separate interrogation room, who provided the cold, unvarnished truth, his words stripping away the last vestiges of Annie's lies. Confronted with her betrayal, his arrogant facade crumbled into a chillingly prideful confession, his voice dripping with a perverse satisfaction. He detailed the blackmail with relish, describing how he had tracked Annie down after years of silence, sensing an opportunity to exploit her new life, to take something from the woman who had dared to leave him behind. He spoke of the visceral satisfaction of taking something that belonged to the golden boy soldier, a man whose success, honor, and integrity stood in stark contrast to Gabriel's own shadowed existence, a contrast that fueled his hatred. He explained, with no remorse, how he and his cousin had abducted the stunned Alexander from his car later that night, using the ketamine to neutralize the powerfully built army captain, rendering him helpless against their plans. He recounted the drive into the dark, silent hills, the crunch of gravel under their tires, the weight of the night pressing down on them like a conspirator. He described forcing Alexander to his knees, the soldier's eyes burning with defiance even as the drug dulled his strength, his spirit unbroken even in the face of death. And he confessed to pulling the trigger himself, the sound of the gunshot echoing in the stillness of the forest, a final act that sealed Alexander's fate. But his most damning revelation was about Annie. She had not been a passive, terrified witness, as she claimed, a victim caught in Gabriel's web. After the confrontation, after Alexander had left, his heart shattered by her betrayal, she had been the one who had methodically helped Gabriel plan his alibi, her mind cold and calculating. She had suggested the remote, forested area, knowing it was far from prying eyes, a place where the earth could swallow their secret. And she had been the one who had called Alexander, her voice full of false tears, begging him to meet her there, to talk things out, to salvage their love, luring her lover into the kill zone with a performance that was as cruel as it was convincing. Her only concern, Gabriel said with a sneer, had been that no part of it could ever be traced back to her, that her new life, her carefully crafted facade, would remain intact. Detective Corbin sat opposite Laura in the sterile quiet of the briefing room, a thick case file between them, its pages heavy with the weight of the truth, a truth that was both a resolution and a devastation. He walked her through the entire, sordid timeline, his voice heavy with a weary disgust that went beyond professional protocol, a disgust born of seeing the depths of human betrayal. He explained how Annie had orchestrated the meeting, how she had used Alexander's love for her as a weapon, how she had stood by as Gabriel executed the man who had trusted her with his heart. He watched the last vestiges of light die in Laura's eyes as she absorbed the full scope of the betrayal, her face a mask of anguish. It wasn't just that her son had been murdered by a monster like Gabriel Alonso, a man driven by envy and greed. It was that the angel of his life, the woman who had mourned beside her for 3 long years, who had held her hand through the darkest nights, who had sworn to love him forever, had been the one who opened the door and let the monster in. Annie's grief, her tears, her shared hashtag, system, vigils, they had all been a lie, a performance so convincing it had deceived a mother's heart, exploiting Laura's love and trust to mask her own guilt. Corbin detailed the evidence. The burner phone records, the cash withdrawals, the witness statement from Gabriel's cousin, who had corroborated the story in exchange for a reduced sentence. Each piece was a nail in the coffin of Laura's illusions, a confirmation that the woman she had embraced as a daughter had orchestrated her son's death with a coldness that defied comprehension. Laura drove home under the indifferent blue of the California sky, the world outside her car a blur of color and motion, a world that felt alien and unreal. The familiar streets of Lakewood, once a backdrop to her son's laughter and dreams, now seemed like a stage set for a tragedy she could no longer escape. She walked into the house that was no longer a shrine, but a mausoleum of lies, its walls echoing with the betrayal of everything she had believed, every memory she had cherished. She stood before the photographs of Alexander and Annie, their smiling faces frozen in a moment of happiness that now felt like a mockery, a cruel illusion. The young couple, radiant with love, stared back at her, their eyes mocking her with the lie they had lived. She felt a grief so profound it threatened to unmake her, a grief not just for her son, but for the trust she had placed in Annie, for the bond they had forged in their shared sorrow, for the illusion of love that had sustained her through the darkest years of her life. She reached out, her hand trembling, and removed Annie's photograph from the mantel, placing it face down, unable to bear the sight of her false smile. She had won, in a way. Her determination, her refusal to let her son's memory fade, had brought his killers to justice. Gabriel Alonso would face trial for murder, his confession a chain that would bind him to a lifetime behind bars, a fitting punishment for his cold-blooded act. Annie, too, would face the consequences of her betrayal, her carefully constructed facade shattered by the weight of the evidence, her lies exposed to the world. The evidence was overwhelming. The phone records, the financial transactions, Gabriel's testimony, and the physical evidence from the crime scene all pointed to her complicity. She would be charged with conspiracy to commit murder, her role in luring Alexander to his death a betrayal that would haunt her for the rest of her life. But the victory was hollow, a Pyrrhic triumph that left Laura standing in the wreckage of her own heart, surrounded by the ruins of everything she had held dear. The truth was a poison, not a cure. It didn't heal the wounds of her loss. It cauterized them, leaving behind a scar uglier than the original wound, a mark that would never fade, a reminder of the betrayal that had stolen her son and her trust. Laura sank into the armchair where she had spent countless nights waiting for news of her son, her hands clutching one of his old sweatshirts, the fabric worn soft by time. It sent a faint echo of the boy she had raised. She closed her eyes and saw Alexander. Not the soldier, not the hero, but the boy who had run to her with scraped knees, his laughter bright and carefree. The teenager who had blushed when he brought Annie home for the first time, his eyes full of shy adoration. The man who had promised to always come back, his voice steady with conviction. She saw him in the moments that had defined him. Teaching his younger cousins to throw a baseball, his patience endless. Writing letters from Afghanistan, his words filled with hope for a future he would never see. Standing tall at his commissioning ceremony, his chest swelling with pride as he saluted her. She had brought him home, in a way, but not in the way she had dreamed, not in the way her heart had yearned for. He had been living in a house of ghosts long before he became one himself, surrounded by a love that was not what it seemed, betrayed by the very person he had trusted most, the woman he had chosen to build a life with. The California sun set outside, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, a fleeting beauty that felt like a mockery of the darkness within. Inside Laura's home, the light had gone out, leaving only shadows and silence. She sat in the stillness, the weight of the truth pressing down on her like a physical force, and knew that this was the final chapter of her son's story. A story not of honor or courage, but of a love that had been a lie, a trust that had been shattered, and a mother's heart that would never be whole again. The house, once a sanctuary, was now a tomb, and Laura was its sole occupant, a guardian of memories that were both her salvation and her curse. She thought of the vigil she had held with Annie, the candles they had lit, the tears they had shed, and realized that every moment had been tainted, every shared sorrow a manipulation. She thought of Alexander's medals, still gleaming on the mantle, and wondered if their shine could ever mean the same, knowing the truth of how he had died. In the days that followed, Laura began to dismantle the shrine she had built. She packed away the photographs of Annie, unable to look at them without feeling the sting of betrayal. She kept Alexander's pictures, his medals, his belongings, but moved them to a quieter corner of the house, a place where they could exist without the weight of her grief. She began to volunteer at a local veterans center, channeling her pain into helping others, finding solace in the stories of soldiers who, like Alexander, had lived lives of honor and sacrifice. She spoke of him often, not as a victim, but as the man he had been: brave, kind, and fiercely loyal. She found a new purpose in keeping his memory alive, not as a ghost haunting her home, but as a legacy of courage that could inspire others. Yet the scars remained. At night, when the house was quiet and the world outside slept, Laura would sit with Alexander's sweatshirt, her fingers tracing the worn fabric, and let herself feel the full weight of her loss. She would cry for the boy she had raised, the man he had become, and the future they had both been denied. She would cry for the trust she had lost, the love she had believed in, and the truth that had broken her heart. But she would also rise each morning, her resolve unbroken, determined to live a life worthy of her son's memory, to carry his light forward even in the face of darkness. The house, though still a tomb in its quiet moments, began to feel like a home again, a place where Laura could honor Alexander not with grief, but with the fierce, unrelenting love of a mother who would never let him go.